A young white man named Jason married an old, rich black woman for her money. But when Elizabeth found out his plan, she did something he never expected. Will Jason be able to outsmart her, or will he face the consequences of his evil plan? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jason sighed heavily as he entered the small, cramped apartment he shared with his mother, Linda. The air inside was stuffy and smelled faintly of medication. He set down his grocery bags on the worn kitchen counter, careful not to make too much noise. "Mom, I'm home," he called out softly. A weak voice responded from the bedroom. "In here, sweetie." Jason's heart clenched as he walked into the dimly lit room. Linda lay in bed, her once vibrant face now pale and drawn. She managed a small smile as he approached. "How are you feeling today?" Jason asked, gently taking her hand. "Oh, same old," Linda replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Did you have a good day at work?" Jason nodded, forcing a smile. He couldn't bear to tell her about the stack of unpaid bills waiting on the kitchen table. The weight of their mounting debt pressed down on him like a physical force. Later that evening, after making sure his mother was comfortable, Jason sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by overdue notices and medical bills. His eyes stung with unshed tears as he tried to make sense of their financial situation. "There has to be a way," he muttered, running his hands through his hair in frustration. As if answering his plea, a flyer slipped out from between the bills. Jason picked it up, his eyes widening as he read the glossy text. It advertised a charity gala happening that weekend, promising an evening of elegance and generosity. "Wealthy individuals," Jason whispered, an idea forming in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, this could be his chance to find a way out of their dire situation. With trembling hands, he reached for his laptop and began researching the event. The gala was open to the public, but tickets were expensive. Jason bit his lip, considering his options. He knew it was a long shot, but he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. "I have to try," he said softly, glancing towards his mother's room. "For Mom." As he continued to plan, Jason felt a mix of excitement and guilt. He knew attending the gala might be a desperate move, but he was willing to do anything to help his mother and escape the crushing weight of their circumstances. Jason tugged nervously at his rented tuxedo as he entered the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow on the well-dressed crowd. He felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by people who exuded wealth and confidence. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the elegant decorations and the soft music playing in the background. The scent of expensive perfumes and gourmet hors d'oeuvres filled the air. Jason's stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since breakfast to save money for this event. As he made his way through the crowd, he overheard snippets of conversation about stock portfolios and vacation homes. It all seemed so far removed from his own reality of unpaid bills and his mother's illness. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon a striking figure across the room. An elegant black woman stood alone near a large floral arrangement, her silver hair styled in a sophisticated updo. She wore a deep purple gown that shimmered as she moved, and her eyes held a hint of sadness despite her graceful demeanor. Curious, Jason edged closer to a nearby group, straining to hear their conversation. "That's Elizabeth Thornton," a woman in a red dress whispered to her companion. "Poor dear, she's been so lonely since losing her husband and son." "I heard she's worth millions," the man replied. "Inherited her late husband's business empire, but she rarely attends these events anymore." Jason's heart began to race. Could this be the opportunity he'd been hoping for? He watched as Elizabeth moved towards the refreshment table, her movements graceful but somehow hesitant. As she reached for a glass of champagne, her small beaded purse slipped from her grasp, falling to the polished floor with a soft thud. Without hesitation, Jason stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, bending down to retrieve the purse. "I believe you dropped this." Elizabeth turned, her dark eyes meeting Jason's. For a moment, He was struck by the depth of emotion he saw there, a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and something that looked like hope. "Oh, thank you, young man," Elizabeth said, her voice warm and rich. "How kind of you to notice." Jason smiled, offering her the purse. "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Thornton. I'm Jason, by the way." Elizabeth's eyes lit up with surprise and warmth as Jason introduced himself. She smiled, grateful for his kindness. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Jason," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. "Are you enjoying the gala?" Jason nodded, his nervousness melting away as he gazed into Elizabeth's gentle eyes. "I am, Mrs. Thornton. Though I must admit, I feel a bit out of place among all this grandeur." Elizabeth chuckled, a sound that reminded Jason of wind chimes. "Please call me Elizabeth, and don't worry, I often feel the same way at these events." As they talked, Jason found himself genuinely drawn to Elizabeth's stories. She spoke of her late husband with such love and admiration that Jason couldn't help but feel touched. "Thomas always believed in giving back," Elizabeth said, her eyes misting over. "Our foundation was his dream, you know, to help children from underprivileged backgrounds get a good education." Jason listened intently, nodding at the right moments. "That's incredible, Elizabeth. Your husband sounds like he was a remarkable man." "He truly was," Elizabeth agreed, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. "And what about you, Jason? What brings you to this gala?" Jason hesitated for a moment, then decided to be as honest as he could. "I've always been passionate about helping others. When I heard about this event, I knew I had to come, even if it meant renting this tux," he added with a self-deprecating laugh. Elizabeth's face softened with understanding. "That's very admirable, Jason. It's not often I meet someone so young with such a giving heart." As they continued to chat, Jason found himself opening up about his own experiences volunteering at local shelters. Though he embellished some details, the core of his stories came from a place of truth, his genuine desire to help his mother. Elizabeth listened attentively, clearly moved by Jason's apparent passion for philanthropy. "You know, Jason," she said, placing a hand on his arm, "we could use more young people like you in our foundation. Would you be interested in learning more about our work?" Jason's heart raced with excitement and a twinge of guilt. "I'd be honored, Elizabeth. Your work sounds truly inspiring." The next day, Elizabeth and Jason met at a quaint little cafe nestled in the heart of the city. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on their table. Elizabeth arrived first, her elegant posture and kind smile drawing admiring glances from other patrons. When Jason walked in, his eyes immediately found Elizabeth. He felt a flutter in his chest, a mix of nervousness and excitement. As he approached the table, Elizabeth stood to greet him with a gentle hug. "I'm so glad you could make it, Jason," she said, her voice warm and sincere. Jason smiled, feeling both guilty and touched by her genuine welcome. "Thank you for inviting me, Elizabeth. It means a lot." They settled into their seats, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Elizabeth shared stories of her late husband and son, her eyes glistening with both joy and sadness as she recounted happy memories. "They were my whole world," she confided, her voice soft. "Losing them, it left such a void in my life." Jason reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. "I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you. You're incredibly strong, Elizabeth." As they talked, Jason found himself opening up about his own life. He spoke of his mother's illness and their mounting financial struggles. Though he had initially planned to fabricate a story, the truth spilled out before he could stop it. "Mom's all I have," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd do anything to make sure she gets the care she needs." Elizabeth listened intently, her heart going out to the young man before her. She saw in Jason a kindred spirit, someone who understood the importance of family and the weight of responsibility. "Jason," she said softly, squeezing his hand, "your devotion to your mother is truly admirable. It reminds me so much of how my Thomas cared for his parents." As the afternoon wore on, Elizabeth found herself increasingly drawn to Jason's warmth and apparent compassion. She saw in him a potential companion who could understand her values and perhaps even help fill the emptiness in her life. As the days passed, Jason found himself spending more and more time with Elizabeth. They shared meals, attended charity events, and took long walks in the park. With each encounter, Elizabeth's fondness for Jason grew, and he could see it in her eyes in the way she smiled at him. But beneath Jason's charming exterior, a battle raged within him. Every time Elizabeth's face lit up at his arrival, every time she reached for his hand, he felt a sharp pang of guilt. He tried to push it aside, reminding himself of his mother's mounting medical bills and their dire financial situation. Late one night, after saying goodbye to Elizabeth following a dinner date, Jason sat at his small desk in his cramped apartment. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his troubled face as he began researching Elizabeth's financial assets. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard, but he forced himself to continue. As he delved deeper into Elizabeth's wealth, his eyes widened. The extent of her fortune was even greater than he had imagined. With this knowledge, Jason began to formulate a plan. He would continue to build Elizabeth's trust, shower her with attention and affection, and eventually propose marriage. Jason's mind raced with the possibilities. With access to Elizabeth's wealth, he could pay off all his debts, provide the best care for his mother, and finally escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped him for so long. But as he closed his laptop and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Jason couldn't shake the image of Elizabeth's kind, trusting face from his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to convince himself that this was the only way, that he had no other choice. As the weeks passed, Jason and Elizabeth's relationship blossomed. They spent more and more time together, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. Elizabeth, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, eagerly introduced Jason to her various philanthropic projects. One sunny afternoon, they visited a local community center that Elizabeth had helped fund. As they walked through the bustling halls, Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with pride. "This place means so much to me," she said, squeezing Jason's hand. "It's wonderful to see how it's changing lives." Jason nodded and smiled, feigning interest. "It's truly amazing, Elizabeth," he replied, his mind secretly calculating the potential financial benefits of her generosity. He watched as she greeted the staff and chatted with the center's patrons, all the while thinking about how he could use her wealth to solve his own problems. Later that evening, they sat together on Elizabeth's plush sofa, sipping tea. Elizabeth's face grew somber as she turned to Jason. "You know, before I met you, I was so lonely," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "After losing my husband and son, I thought I'd never find someone to share my life with again." Jason felt a twinge of guilt as he saw the vulnerability in Elizabeth's eyes. He reached out and took her hand, pushing aside his conflicting emotions. "I'm here now," he said softly, trying to sound sincere. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've brought so much joy back into my life, Jason," she said. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. I've been so afraid to open my heart, but with you, it feels right." As Elizabeth continued to open up about her fears and hopes, Jason listened attentively. He nodded at the right moments, offered comforting words, and played the part of the perfect companion. But inside, he was torn. The more Elizabeth shared, the harder it became for him to see her as just a means to an end. Jason had planned every detail of this evening meticulously. The romantic dinner at Elizabeth's favorite restaurant, the moonlit walk through the park, and now, as they stood on the balcony of her penthouse overlooking the twinkling city lights, he knew it was time. His heart raced as he turned to face Elizabeth, her kind eyes shining with affection. Jason took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he was about to do. He reached into his pocket, feeling the small velvet box that held the ring he had carefully chosen. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "these past few months with you have been the happiest of my life." He paused, watching as her eyes widened with realization. Slowly, Jason lowered himself to one knee, holding out the open ring box. The diamond sparkled in the soft light. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked down at Jason. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Oh, Jason," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I will marry you." Jason slipped the ring onto her finger, a smile spreading across his face. As he stood up, Elizabeth threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. He could feel her tears of joy dampening his shoulder. In that moment, Jason felt a surge of triumph. His plan was working perfectly. Soon, he would have access to Elizabeth's wealth and all his problems would be solved. He would be able to pay off his debts and provide the best care for his mother. But as he held Elizabeth in his arms, listening to her whispered words of love and gratitude, a small voice in the back of his mind began to speak up. It questioned his motives, reminding him of the genuine kindness and love Elizabeth had shown him. For a brief moment, Jason felt a pang of guilt. The wedding day arrived bathed in soft autumn sunlight. Elizabeth had chosen a small chapel for the ceremony, its stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across the polished wooden pews. Jason stood at the altar, fidgeting with his bow tie, his eyes fixed on the entrance. When Elizabeth appeared, a collective gasp filled the room. She was radiant in a simple ivory gown, her face glowing with happiness. Jason felt his breath catch in his throat. For a moment, he forgot about his plan, mesmerized by her beauty and the love shining in her eyes. The ceremony was brief but touching. As they exchanged vows, Jason's voice wavered slightly, torn between his genuine affection for Elizabeth and the guilt gnawing at his conscience. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elizabeth's smile was so bright it seemed to light up the entire chapel. After the ceremony, the small group of guests gathered for an intimate reception at Elizabeth's favorite restaurant. The room was filled with soft music and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Jason found himself surrounded by Elizabeth's wealthy friends, their curious eyes studying him intently. "So, Jason," a silver-haired man named Richard approached him, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Elizabeth tells us you're in finance. Which firm did you say you worked for again?" Jason felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. "Oh, I'm actually between jobs at the moment," he replied smoothly. "I'm looking forward to exploring new opportunities now that Elizabeth and I are married." Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. Jason could feel the suspicion radiating from him and some of the other guests. He plastered on a charming smile, determined not to let their doubts rattle him. Elizabeth, sensing the tension, quickly came to Jason's side. She slipped her arm through his, beaming up at him. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said to her friends. "Jason has such a kind heart. He's been telling me all about his ideas for expanding our charitable work." Jason nodded enthusiastically, grateful for Elizabeth's intervention. He launched into a discussion about potential new projects, drawing on the research he had done to impress Elizabeth during their courtship. As he spoke, he could see some of the suspicion in the guests' eyes begin to fade. Throughout the reception, Jason worked hard to charm Elizabeth's friends, brushing off their probing questions with easy laughter and redirecting conversations to safer topics. He was determined to win them over, knowing that their approval could be crucial to his plans. Jason stepped into Elizabeth's sprawling mansion, his eyes wide with awe. The marble floors gleamed, and sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Elizabeth squeezed his hand, her eyes twinkling with joy. "Welcome home, darling," she said softly. As days turned into weeks, Jason found himself settling into a life he had only dreamed of. Every morning he woke up in a plush, king-sized bed, surrounded by luxury. But it wasn't just the material comforts that began to affect him. Elizabeth's passion for helping others was contagious. She invited Jason to join her at various charity events and volunteer activities. At first, he went along reluctantly, seeing it as part of his act. But something unexpected started to happen. At a local soup kitchen, Jason watched as Elizabeth ladled out steaming bowls of soup, chatting warmly with each person who came through the line. Her genuine care for others touched something deep inside him. "Here," Elizabeth said, handing him an apron. "Why don't you help serve the bread?" Jason hesitated for a moment before putting on the apron. As he handed out slices of warm bread, he found himself making eye contact with the people he served. Their grateful smiles and quiet thank yous stirred unfamiliar emotions in his chest. One afternoon, Elizabeth took Jason to visit a shelter for abused women and children that she had helped fund. As they toured the facility, Jason saw the impact of Elizabeth's generosity firsthand. The safe, comfortable rooms and the relieved faces of the residents made a profound impression on him. "This is amazing," Jason murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Elizabeth beamed at him. "It's wonderful to be able to make a difference, isn't it?" Jason nodded, unable to speak. For the first time, he began to see the true value of wealth beyond personal comfort. Elizabeth's dedication to using her resources to help others was slowly changing his perspective. As they left the shelter, Jason found himself asking Elizabeth about her other charitable projects. His curiosity was genuine, no longer just a ploy to maintain his facade. He listened intently as she described her plans for a new education initiative in underprivileged neighborhoods. To his own surprise, Jason found himself offering suggestions and ideas. Elizabeth's eyes lit up as they discussed ways to make the program even more effective. For a moment, Jason forgot about his original plan, caught up in the excitement of potentially making a real difference in people's lives. As the weeks passed, Jason found himself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The quiet evenings he spent with Elizabeth became a cherished part of his day. They would sit in the cozy library, surrounded by shelves of books, sipping tea and talking for hours. One such evening, Elizabeth shared her dream of expanding her charitable work to include a mentorship program for underprivileged youth. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she spoke, and Jason found himself captivated by her passion. "What do you think, Jason?" Elizabeth asked, leaning forward in her armchair. "Do you think it could make a difference?" Jason paused, considering her words. To his surprise, he realized he genuinely cared about her ideas. "I think it's brilliant," he said softly. "You could change so many lives." Elizabeth beamed at him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through Jason, and he felt a flutter in his chest that he couldn't quite explain. As they continued to discuss their hopes and dreams, Jason found himself opening up about his own childhood struggles. He shared stories he had never told anyone before, about the times his mother had worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Elizabeth listened intently, her eyes filled with compassion. "You've overcome so much," she said gently. "I admire your strength, Jason." Her words touched something deep within him, and Jason felt a lump form in his throat. For a moment, he forgot about his plan and saw Elizabeth for who she truly was, a kind, generous woman who genuinely cared about him. But as the evening drew to a close, reality came crashing back. Jason lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind in turmoil. He couldn't deny the growing affection he felt for Elizabeth, but the thought of his ailing mother and their mounting debts weighed heavily on him. "I have no choice," he whispered to himself, trying to steel his resolve. "This is the only way." Even as he reaffirmed his commitment to his plan, Jason couldn't shake the gnawing guilt that had taken root in his heart. The path ahead seemed less clear than ever before, but he was determined to see it through, no matter the cost to his conscience. Jason took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. He found Elizabeth in her study, poring over documents related to her latest charitable project. Her face lit up when she saw him, and Jason felt a pang of guilt. "Elizabeth, darling," he began, his voice soft. "I've been thinking about our finances." Elizabeth set down her papers, giving Jason her full attention. "Oh? What's on your mind, dear?" Jason sat down across from her, his heart racing. "Well, I was wondering if it might be simpler if we combined our assets. You know, to streamline things." He watched Elizabeth carefully, searching for any sign of suspicion. To his surprise and dismay, she simply smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful idea, Jason," she said without hesitation. "It would certainly make things easier. We're partners in everything else, why not this too?" Jason felt a mix of relief and unease wash over him. "You're sure?" he asked, almost hoping she would reconsider. Elizabeth reached across the desk and took his hand. Of course, I'm sure. I trust you completely, Jason. You've brought so much joy into my life. Her words hit Jason like a punch to the gut. He forced a smile, even as his conscience screamed at him. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll talk to our lawyer and get the process started. As he left the study, Jason's mind was in turmoil. He had expected some resistance, some questioning. But Elizabeth's complete trust in him made his actions feel even more despicable. Back in their bedroom, Jason sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He had achieved what he set out to do, but the victory felt hollow. Elizabeth's unwavering faith in him was both a blessing and a curse. It made his plan easier to execute, but it also magnified the weight of his deception. The next day, Elizabeth called Jason into her study with an excited smile on her face. I have a surprise for you, darling, she said, her eyes twinkling. Jason's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what to expect. What is it, love? Elizabeth turned her computer screen towards him, revealing an online banking page. I've set up a joint account for us, she explained, her voice warm with affection. I want you to have full access to our finances. Jason's eyes widened as he saw the balance displayed on the screen. The amount was staggering, far more than he had ever imagined. He felt a rush of excitement course through his veins, mixed with a twinge of guilt. Elizabeth, I don't know what to say, he stammered, genuinely taken aback by her trust and generosity. She reached out and squeezed his hand. You don't have to say anything. We're partners now, in every sense of the word. Over the next few days, Jason found himself constantly checking the account balance on his phone, still in disbelief. The temptation was overwhelming, and soon he began to act on his original plan. Carefully, he started transferring small amounts to a separate account he had set up. He was meticulous, ensuring the transfers were irregular and not too frequent. Each time he moved money, his heart raced, torn between exhilaration and shame. As the secret account grew, Jason felt a mix of triumph and unease. He was getting what he wanted, but at what cost? Elizabeth's trust in him was absolute, and every loving glance she gave him felt like a silent accusation. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Elizabeth leaned her head on Jason's shoulder. I'm so glad we're doing this together, she murmured contentedly. Managing our finances, our life, everything. Jason swallowed hard, his arm around her, suddenly feeling heavy with the weight of his deceit. Me too, he replied softly, his voice barely above a whisper. As the days turned into weeks, Jason found himself caught in a web of his own making. Each morning, he would wake up next to Elizabeth, her peaceful face a stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. The weight of his deception grew heavier with each passing day. Elizabeth, oblivious to Jason's inner struggle, showered him with more love and affection than ever before. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled hand in hand through their lush garden, she turned to him with eyes brimming with happiness. You know, Jason, she said softly, I never thought I'd find this kind of joy again after losing my husband and son, but you've brought light back into my life. Jason felt his chest tighten at her words. He managed a smile, but inside, he was crumbling. I'm glad I make you happy, Elizabeth, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. That evening, as Elizabeth busied herself in the kitchen preparing dinner, Jason retreated to their bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, wrestling with his conscience. The guilt was eating away at him, threatening to consume him whole. What am I doing? He muttered to himself, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. But then, as always, thoughts of his ailing mother flooded his mind. He pictured her frail form, lying in that cramped apartment, struggling to afford her medication. The image steeled his resolve. I have to do this, he told himself firmly, for Mom, she needs me. Yet, even as he tried to justify his actions, Jason couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that he was losing a part of himself in the process. Elizabeth's kindness and genuine love for him were starting to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. As he heard Elizabeth's cheerful voice calling him down for dinner, Jason took a deep breath, pushing his doubts aside. He plastered on a smile and headed downstairs, determined to keep up the charade, all the while wondering how long he could continue living this double life. As Jason became more involved in Elizabeth's philanthropic work, his internal conflict grew stronger with each passing day. He found himself accompanying her to various charity events and volunteering at local shelters. At first, he had viewed these activities as mere obligations, necessary to maintain his facade. But as time went on, something unexpected began to happen. One crisp autumn morning, Jason stood beside Elizabeth at a food bank, handing out warm meals to those in need. He watched as a young mother, her eyes filled with gratitude, accepted a bag of groceries from Elizabeth. The woman's small child clung to her leg, peering up at them with wide, hopeful eyes. "Thank you so much," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Elizabeth smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "We're here to help," she said softly. "You're not alone." As Jason observed this interaction, he felt a lump form in his throat. For the first time, he truly saw the impact of Elizabeth's generosity. It wasn't just about writing checks or attending fancy galas. It was about making a real difference in people's lives. Later that evening, as they drove home, Elizabeth reached over and squeezed Jason's hand. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her eyes shining with love. "The way you connected with those families today. You have such a big heart, Jason." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Jason felt a wave of shame wash over him as he thought about the money he had been secretly siphoning away. He looked at Elizabeth's trusting face and felt his resolve begin to crumble. I just want to help," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Elizabeth beamed at him, completely unaware of the turmoil raging within her husband. "And you are, my love. We're making a difference together." As they continued their drive home in comfortable silence, Jason's mind raced. He thought about the struggling families they had helped, the grateful faces, the lives they were changing. Then he thought about his own mother, waiting for him in that small apartment. He had started this deception for her sake, but now he wasn't sure if he could go through with it. Jason found himself at a crossroads, torn between his original plan and the unexpected path that was opening before him. Elizabeth's unwavering love and trust only deepened his internal struggle, making his decision all the more difficult. Elizabeth's latest charity event was a heartfelt gathering at a local community center. The room buzzed with warmth and hope as people from all walks of life came together to support those in need. Jason stood by Elizabeth's side, greeting guests and listening to their stories. As the evening progressed, Jason found himself deeply moved by the tales of hardship and resilience he heard. A young man, barely out of his teens, approached them with tears in his eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice quivering, "I just wanted to thank you. The scholarship you provided. It changed my life. I'm the first in my family to go to college." Elizabeth smiled warmly, embracing the young man. "You did all the hard work, dear. I'm just glad I could help open the door for you." Jason watched this exchange, feeling a lump form in his throat. He saw the genuine joy in Elizabeth's eyes and the profound gratitude in the young man's face. It was a moment of pure, unselfish kindness that touched him deeply. Throughout the night, more people approached Elizabeth, each with a story of how her generosity had transformed their lives. There was a single mother who had received help with childcare, allowing her to finish her degree. An elderly couple spoke of how Elizabeth's support had kept them in their home during tough times. As Jason listened to these stories, he began to see wealth in a new light. It wasn't just about luxury or security. It was a tool that could uplift entire communities and change lives for the better. He looked at Elizabeth with newfound admiration, realizing the true impact of her kindness and generosity. That night, as they lay in bed, Jason found himself wide awake, his mind racing. Elizabeth slept peacefully beside him, her face serene in the soft moonlight filtering through the curtains. He turned to look at her, feeling a surge of affection that caught him off guard. Jason's heart was torn. On one hand, there was his original plan, the reason he had entered this marriage. The thought of his mother, still struggling in that small apartment, weighed heavily on him. But on the other hand, there was Elizabeth, kind, loving, and genuinely good. He thought of all the lives she had touched, all the good she had done. As he lay there, Jason felt the conflict within him grow. The line between his initial deception and his growing feelings for Elizabeth blurred. He wondered if he could really go through with his plan, knowing now the true value of what Elizabeth did with her wealth. The following morning, Jason woke up feeling uneasy. His night had been filled with restless dreams, his conscience weighing heavily on him. As he made his way downstairs, he found Elizabeth in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. "Good morning, darling," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I have something to tell you." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been doing some research. I wanted to surprise you." She paused, reaching for Jason's hand. "I've been quietly helping your mother with her medical bills for the past month." Jason felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He stared at Elizabeth, unable to speak. "I know how much you worry about her," Elizabeth continued, misinterpreting his silence as shock. "I thought this might ease your mind a little." Tears welled up in Jason's eyes. The kindness of Elizabeth's gesture overwhelmed him, making his deception feel even more cruel. He struggled to find words, his throat tight with emotion. "Elizabeth, I don't know what to say," he managed to choke out. She squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to say anything, love. Your mother's health is important to me because she's important to you." Jason felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Here was Elizabeth selflessly helping his mother without any expectation of recognition or reward. And all this time, he had been plotting to take advantage of her generosity. As Elizabeth busied herself with breakfast, Jason sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought. He began to question everything, his plan, his motives, and most of all, his own character. The idea of confessing his original intentions to Elizabeth crossed his mind, but fear gripped his heart. What if he lost everything? Not just the financial security he had sought, but also the love and trust of this remarkable woman. Elizabeth's surprise left Jason speechless. She handed him an envelope, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Open it, darling," she urged gently. With trembling hands, Jason opened the envelope. Inside was a check for an amount that made his eyes widen in disbelief. He looked up at Elizabeth, his mouth agape. This is for me?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth nodded, her smile warm and loving. "Yes, my dear. I want you to use it as you see fit. Perhaps for your mother's care or for any dreams you've been holding on to." Jason stared at the check, his mind racing. This was more money than he had ever held in his hands before. It was enough to solve all his problems, to take care of his mother's medical bills, and to start a new life. It was everything he had originally planned for when he first set out to marry Elizabeth. But as he looked at Elizabeth's radiant face, filled with love and trust, Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. The weight of his deception pressed down on him like never before. Here was a woman who loved him unconditionally, who trusted him completely, offering him a gift that could change his life. Jason's mind raced with possibilities. He could take this money and disappear, fulfilling his original plan. It would be so easy. He could ensure his mother's care and start fresh somewhere else. No one would ever have to know the truth. But as he contemplated this option, Jason felt a deep sense of shame wash over him. How could he betray Elizabeth's trust like that? How could he walk away from someone who had shown him nothing but kindness and love? The alternative was equally daunting. He could confess everything to Elizabeth, his initial motives, his deception, his gradual change of heart. But what would that mean? Would she ever forgive him? Would she understand that his feelings for her had become real, that he had grown to love her deeply? Jason stood there, the check in his hand, torn between his past and his future, between his fears and his growing conscience. Elizabeth watched him, her eyes full of love and expectation, unaware of the turmoil raging within him. Jason sat at the computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The check Elizabeth had given him lay beside the mouse, its numbers taunting him. He had already logged into his secret bank account, ready to make the transfer that would secure his future. But something held him back. As Jason stared at the screen, memories flooded his mind. He saw Elizabeth's warm smile when she first invited him to lunch. He remembered the tenderness in her eyes as she listened to his stories about his mother. He recalled the passion in her voice when she spoke about her charitable work. His heart ached as he thought of all the moments they had shared, the quiet evenings spent talking about their dreams, the way Elizabeth's face lit up when he proposed, the trust she showed him every single day. Jason's hand trembled as he reached for the mouse, but instead of clicking the transfer button, he found himself closing the browser window. He couldn't do it. He couldn't betray Elizabeth like this. The weight of his deception pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Jason realized that somewhere along the way, his feelings for Elizabeth had become real. The plan that had once seemed so simple now felt impossible to carry out. He stood up abruptly, pushing away from the desk. His mind was made up. He had to tell Elizabeth the truth, no matter the consequences. The thought terrified him, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Jason found Elizabeth in the garden tending to her roses. The sight of her, so peaceful and unsuspecting, made his heart clench. He approached her slowly, each step feeling like lead. "Elizabeth," he called out softly. I need to talk to you about something important." Elizabeth turned to him, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Of course, darling. What is it?" Jason took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "I haven't been honest with you," he began, his voice shaking. "There's something I need to confess." Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he sat down beside Elizabeth on the garden bench. The fragrance of roses hung in the air, a stark contrast to the heaviness in his soul. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he clasped them together. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. It's not easy for me to say this." Elizabeth turned to face him, her warm brown eyes filled with concern. "What is it, Jason? You can tell me anything." Jason swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I haven't been honest with you. From the very beginning, I had a plan, a terrible, selfish plan." He paused, expecting Elizabeth to react, but she remained silent, her gaze steady and patient. Encouraged by her calmness, Jason continued. "When we first met at the charity gala, I approached you with the intention of marrying you for your money," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I was desperate. My mother's medical bills were piling up, and I saw you as a way out of my financial troubles." Jason's shoulders slumped as he spoke, the weight of his deception finally lifting. He couldn't bring himself to look at Elizabeth, fearing the disappointment and anger he was sure to see in her eyes. "I never meant to fall in love with you," he whispered, a tear rolling down his cheek. "But I did. And now I can't go through with it. I can't hurt you like that. You've shown me nothing but kindness and love, and I've repaid you with lies." To Jason's surprise, Elizabeth didn't recoil from him. She didn't raise her voice or demand that he leave. Instead, she remained silent, her eyes full of compassion as she listened to his confession. Encouraged by her silence, Jason continued to pour out his heart. He told her about his initial plan, how he had started to transfer small amounts of money, and how her kindness and generosity had slowly changed him. He explained the internal conflict he had been facing, torn between his desperate need for financial security and the genuine love he had developed for her. As Jason spoke, Elizabeth's expression remained calm and thoughtful. She didn't interrupt him, allowing him to share every detail of his deception and his journey towards redemption. As Jason's confession came to an end, he braced himself for Elizabeth's reaction. To his utter amazement, a gentle smile spread across her face. She reached out and took his hand in hers, her touch warm and comforting. "Oh, Jason," Elizabeth said softly, her voice filled with understanding. "I've known about your plan from the very beginning." Jason's eyes widened in shock. You knew?" he stammered, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and kindness. Yes, I did. You see, I'm part of a network of philanthropists who do more than just donate money. We often test the integrity of those we choose to help. Jason listened in stunned silence as Elizabeth explained further. When I met you at the gala, I saw a young man desperate for help, but with a good heart underneath it all. I decided to take a chance on you, hoping that by showing you kindness and love, you would choose to do the right thing in the end. Tears welled up in Jason's eyes as the full weight of Elizabeth's words sank in. She had known all along, yet she had still chosen to love him, to trust him, to believe in the goodness within him. But why? Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you take such a risk? Elizabeth squeezed his hand gently. Because I saw the potential for good in you, Jason. I believed that if given the chance, you would choose love and integrity over greed. And you have proven me right. Jason felt overwhelmed by emotion. The realization that Elizabeth had seen the best in him, even when he couldn't see it himself, was almost too much to bear. He had been given a precious gift, the chance to become a better person, to live up to the faith she had placed in him. Elizabeth's eyes shimmered with compassion as she looked at Jason, her hand still gently holding his. Jason, I forgive you, she said softly, her voice filled with warmth and understanding. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. You forgive me? Just like that? He asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Elizabeth nodded, a gentle smile playing on her lips. Yes, I do. I've seen the change in you, Jason. I've watched you grow, seen your heart open up to the joy of helping others. Everyone deserves a second chance, and you've proven that you're worthy of one. Tears spilled down Jason's cheeks as the full impact of Elizabeth's words hit him. He had come into her life with selfish intentions, yet she had seen beyond that, believing in the goodness within him even when he couldn't see it himself. Elizabeth, I don't know what to say, Jason whispered, overwhelmed by her kindness and grace. As he looked into her eyes, Jason felt something shift deep within his heart. The guilt and shame that had been weighing him down began to lift, replaced by a feeling he had never experienced before. It was then that Jason realized with startling clarity that he had genuinely fallen in love with Elizabeth. I love you, he blurted out, surprised by his own words but knowing they were true. I love you, Elizabeth, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I want to be the man you believed I could be. Elizabeth's eyes widened with joy and she squeezed his hand tighter. Oh, Jason, she said, her voice filled with emotion. Jason continued, his words tumbling out in a rush of sincerity. I want to help others, just like you do. I want to use whatever skills I have to make a difference in people's lives. Will you teach me? Will you let me be a part of your world of giving and kindness? Elizabeth nodded, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. Of course, Jason. Nothing would make me happier than to share this journey with you. With a deep breath, Jason looked into Elizabeth's eyes, his heart heavy with determination. Elizabeth, I need to make things right, he said, his voice filled with resolve. I want to return every penny I took from you. Elizabeth's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained silent, allowing Jason to continue. And I think it's best if you remove my access to your accounts, Jason added, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't deserve that kind of trust. Not yet. Elizabeth reached out and took Jason's hand in hers, her touch gentle and reassuring. Jason, I appreciate your honesty and your desire to make amends. If that's what you feel is right, then I'll respect your decision. Jason felt a weight lift from his shoulders at her words. He had feared her reaction, but once again, Elizabeth's compassion astounded him. But, Elizabeth continued, a spark of excitement in her eyes, I have a proposal for you. Instead of simply returning the money, why don't we use it for something meaningful? Something that aligns with the values you've come to embrace? Jason's eyebrows raised in surprise. What do you mean? Elizabeth smiled warmly. I've seen how moved you've been by our charitable work. Why don't we use that money to start a new project, one that we can work on together? Jason's heart swelled with emotion. The idea of using the very money he had taken out of greed for a noble cause felt like the perfect way to redeem himself. That sounds amazing, Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. But what kind of project did you have in mind? Elizabeth squeezed his hand gently. Well, that's something we can decide together. What issues have touched your heart the most during our work? Jason thought for a moment, remembering the faces of those they had helped. The children, he said softly. The ones who don't have access to proper education or health care. I can't stop thinking about how different their lives could be with just a little help. Elizabeth's face lit up. That's perfect, Jason. We could start a foundation focused on providing educational opportunities and health care for underprivileged children. As they began to discuss the possibilities, Jason felt a sense of purpose wash over him. He realized that this was what he had been searching for all along, not wealth for its own sake, but the chance to make a real difference in the world. A month passed, filled with hard work and dedication as Elizabeth and Jason poured their hearts into their new foundation. The couple grew closer with each passing day, their bond strengthened by their shared purpose and genuine love for one another. On a crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth and Jason stood hand in hand in a small garden, surrounded by a group of people whose lives they had touched. The air was filled with a sense of joy and anticipation as they prepared to renew their vows. Jason looked at Elizabeth, his eyes shining with love and gratitude. She wore a simple white dress, her face radiant with happiness. He couldn't believe how far they had come, how much his life had changed because of her unwavering faith in him. As they faced each other, Jason took a deep breath. This time, there were no hidden agendas, no secrets between them. He spoke from his heart, his voice clear and steady. Elizabeth, when we first met, I was lost. I thought I knew what I wanted, but you showed me what truly matters in life. Your kindness, your compassion, and your love have changed me in ways I never thought possible. Today, I stand before you as a better man, ready to commit my life to you and to the work we do together. I promise to love you, support you, and stand by your side through all of life's challenges. I vow to be honest, faithful, and true, now and always. Elizabeth's eyes glistened with tears as she listened to Jason's words. When it was her turn, she spoke with a voice full of emotion. Jason, our journey hasn't been easy, but it's been beautiful. You've shown me that second chances can lead to the most wonderful surprises in life. Your growth, your dedication, and your love have filled my heart with joy. I promise to continue believing in you, supporting your dreams, and loving you unconditionally. Together, we'll keep making a difference in this world, one life at a time. As they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss, the small gathering erupted in applause. Jason looked around at the smiling faces, children they had helped educate, families they had supported through tough times, and colleagues who had witnessed their journey. In that moment, Jason felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He knew, without a doubt, that he had finally done the right thing. The path ahead was clear, filled with purpose and love. As he held Elizabeth's hand, he felt truly fulfilled, ready to face whatever challenges life might bring, knowing they would face them together. As the weeks passed, Jason found himself becoming more deeply involved in Elizabeth's philanthropic work. He started accompanying her to various charity events and outreach programs, no longer just observing but actively participating. One sunny afternoon, they visited a local community center that provided support for families struggling with medical bills. As Elizabeth spoke with the organizers, Jason noticed a young man sitting alone, looking overwhelmed and defeated. Approaching him, Jason introduced himself. "Hey there, I'm Jason. Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" The young man named Mike nodded hesitantly. As they talked, Jason learned that Mike's mother was battling cancer, and the family was drowning in medical debt. Jason's heart clenched, remembering his own struggles. He leaned in, his voice soft but filled with understanding. "I know exactly how you feel, Mike. I've been there too." For the next hour, Jason shared his own story, the desperation, the fear, and the eventual hope he found. Mike listened intently, his eyes widening as Jason described the support he received and how it changed his life. "You're not alone in this," Jason reassured him, placing a comforting hand on Mikey's shoulder. "We're here to help." Elizabeth watched from across the room, her heart swelling with pride as she saw Jason connect with Mike. She could see the tension leaving Mike's shoulders, replaced by a glimmer of hope. Later that evening, as they drove home, Elizabeth reached over and squeezed Jason's hand. "You were amazing today," she said softly. Jason smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "It felt good to help," he admitted. "I never thought I'd say this, but giving back, it's incredible." From that day forward, Jason threw himself into their philanthropic work with renewed energy. He started developing programs specifically aimed at helping families burdened by medical debt, drawing on his personal experiences to create meaningful solutions. As Jason and Elizabeth worked side by side, their bond grew stronger. They spent long evenings discussing new initiatives, brainstorming ideas, and sharing their dreams for the future. Jason found himself falling even deeper in love with Elizabeth, not just for her kindness and generosity, but for the way she inspired him to be a better person every day. Jason stood outside his mother's modest apartment, his heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. With a gentle knock, he entered the small living room where Linda sat in her favorite armchair, looking much healthier than she had in months with the help of regular medication. "Jason, honey," Linda exclaimed, her face lighting up at the sight of her son. "What a wonderful surprise." Jason smiled, settling into the chair beside her. "Mom, I have something important to tell you," he began, his voice soft but determined. Over the next hour, Jason poured out his heart, recounting everything that had happened since he first met Elizabeth. He spoke of his initial plan, the guilt that consumed him, and the transformative power of Elizabeth's love and forgiveness. Linda listened intently, her eyes widening with each revelation. When Jason finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "Oh, Jason," Linda finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." Jason lowered his head, bracing himself for disappointment. But then he felt his mother's warm hand on his cheek, gently lifting his face to meet her gaze. "I'm so proud of you, my boy," Linda said, her eyes brimming with tears. "You chose the path of integrity and love, even when it was the hardest thing to do." Jason felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "You're not disappointed in me?" Linda shook her head, a tender smile on her face. "I've always known you were a good person, Jason. Life hasn't been easy for us, but you've never lost your kindness. Elizabeth has brought out the best in you, helping you become the man I always knew you could be." Tears welled up in Jason's eyes as he embraced his mother. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "Your faith in me means everything." As they pulled apart, Linda's eyes sparkled with joy. "Now tell me more about this wonderful Elizabeth. I can't wait to meet the woman who's captured my son's heart." One early morning, Jason and Elizabeth sat side by side at their dining room table, surrounded by papers and laptops. They were deep in discussion, planning their newest philanthropic venture. "I think we should call it Second Chances," Jason suggested, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's what you gave me, and what we want to give these kids." Elizabeth nodded, a warm smile spreading across her face. "That's perfect, Jason. And I think your story will be the heart of this program." Over the next few weeks, Jason and Elizabeth worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They reached out to community centers, schools, and youth organizations in underprivileged neighborhoods. Their goal was simple but powerful: to inspire young people to believe in themselves and make positive choices, no matter their circumstances. On a crisp autumn morning, Jason stood before a group of teenagers in a community center gymnasium. His palms were sweaty, but his voice was steady as he began to speak. "I know what it's like to feel trapped," he said, his eyes meeting those of the young people before him. "To think that there's no way out except by taking shortcuts or hurting others. I've been there." As Jason shared his story, the desperation, the mistakes, and the redemption, he saw recognition in the eyes of his audience. Some nodded, others leaned forward in their seats. "But I learned something important," Jason continued, his voice filled with conviction. "Our choices define us, not our circumstances, and it's never too late to make the right choice." He went on to explain the Second Chances initiative, detailing the mentorship programs, educational support, and job training opportunities they were offering. As he spoke, he could see hope blooming on the faces before him. After the presentation, a young girl approached Jason, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you really think someone like me could have a second chance?" she asked hesitantly. Jason knelt down to her level, his heart full of compassion. "Absolutely," he said softly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you." As he watched the girl's face light up with a tentative smile, Jason felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that this was just the beginning of their journey to make a difference in these young lives. As the Second Chances initiative gained momentum, Jason and Elizabeth found themselves working side by side more than ever before. Their shared passion for helping others had become the cornerstone of their relationship, strengthening their bond in ways they never imagined. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning sessions, they sat together on their porch swing, watching the sunset. Elizabeth rested her head on Jason's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You know," Jason said softly, "I never thought I could be this happy." Elizabeth looked up at him, her eyes filled with love. "What do you mean?" Jason took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. "When I first met you, I thought wealth was the answer to everything. I was so focused on taking that I couldn't see what really mattered." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But now, seeing the difference we're making in these kids' lives, I realize that true happiness comes from giving." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "I'm so proud of you, Jason. You've come so far." Jason nodded, his eyes misty. "It's all because of you, Elizabeth. You saw the good in me when I couldn't see it myself. You gave me a chance to be better." As they sat there basking in the warmth of the fading sunlight and each other's company, Jason marveled at how much his life had changed. The desperation and guilt that once consumed him had been replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. He thought about the young lives they were touching through their initiative, the hope they were instilling in those who felt hopeless. It filled him with a joy he had never known before. "You know what?" Jason said, turning to Elizabeth with a smile. "I think we're the lucky ones. These kids, they're teaching us as much as we're teaching them." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes shining. "They remind us every day of the power of second chances, don't they?" Jason leaned in and kissed her gently. "They do, and I'm grateful for my second chance every single day." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason and Elizabeth sat in comfortable silence, their hearts full of love for each other and the life they had built together. They knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united in their commitment to making a difference in the world. Jason sat at his desk, sifting through the pile of mail that had accumulated over the past week. Most of it was routine correspondence related to their foundation, but one envelope caught his eye. It was handwritten, addressed simply to Mr. Jason. Curious, he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As he began to read, his heart swelled with emotion. "Dear Mr. Jason, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Tanya, and I was one of the students in your Second Chances program last year. I wanted to write to thank you for everything you've done for me. Before I met you and Mrs. Elizabeth, I didn't think I had a future. My family struggled to make ends meet, and college seemed like an impossible dream. But you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Thanks to your guidance and the scholarship from your foundation, I'm now finishing my first year of nursing school. It hasn't been easy, but every time I feel like giving up, I remember what you told us. Your past doesn't define your future. Mr. Jason, you didn't just give me financial support. You gave me hope. You showed me that it's never too late to change your path in life. Your story inspired me to believe in myself and to keep pushing forward no matter what obstacles I face. I want you to know that your kindness has changed my life forever. One day I hope to pay it forward and help others the way you helped me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sincerely, Tanya. As Jason finished reading, he realized his cheeks were wet with tears. He read the letter again, his hands trembling slightly. Each word resonated deeply within him, reminding him of his own journey and the incredible transformation he had undergone. "Elizabeth," he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "Elizabeth, you need to see this." Elizabeth hurried into the room, concern etched on her face. "What is it, Jason? Is everything okay?" Jason nodded, unable to speak. He handed her the letter, watching as her expression softened while she read. When she finished, Elizabeth looked at Jason with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Jason," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Jason stood up and embraced his wife, the letter still clutched in his hand. "This," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is why we do what we do. This is the true reward." As the sun rose on their first wedding anniversary, Elizabeth and Jason set out on a journey that held deep meaning for both of them. They were returning to the impoverished community that had played such a pivotal role in Jason's transformation. The drive was quiet, filled with anticipation and reflection. Jason's hand rested on Elizabeth's, a gesture of love and gratitude. As they approached the neighborhood, memories flooded back to Jason. Memories of his first visit here when he had been driven by selfish motives. Now his heart swelled with a different emotion: hope. They pulled up to the community center, a modest building that buzzed with activity. As soon as they stepped out of the car, they were greeted by a chorus of cheers and warm smiles. Familiar faces rushed to welcome them, enveloping the couple in hugs and handshakes. "Mr. Jason, Mrs. Elizabeth," a young boy called out, pushing through the crowd. It was Timmy, a child they had helped secure a life-saving operation for just months ago. He threw his arms around Jason's waist, beaming up at him. "Look, I can run now." Jason knelt down, his eyes level with Timmy's. "That's amazing, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." As they made their way through the crowd, Jason was struck by the genuine affection in people's eyes. These weren't just recipients of charity, they were friends, partners in a shared vision of a better future. Inside the community center, they were surprised to find a small celebration had been prepared in their honor. Homemade decorations adorned the walls, and a simple cake sat on a table surrounded by smiling faces. Mrs. Johnson, the center's elderly coordinator, approached them with tears in her eyes. "We couldn't let your anniversary pass without showing our appreciation," she said, squeezing their hands. "You two have brought so much hope to our community." As Jason looked around the room, at the faces of people whose lives he and Elizabeth had touched, he felt a profound sense of belonging. This was where he was meant to be. This was his purpose. As the day's celebrations wound down, Jason and Elizabeth found themselves standing hand in hand on a small hill overlooking the community. The setting sun painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood they had come to love. Jason squeezed Elizabeth's hand gently, his heart full of gratitude. He turned to look at her, marveling at how her eyes sparkled in the fading light. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "I never imagined my life could be like this." She smiled up at him, her face radiating love and understanding. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Jason nodded, his eyes misting over as he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. "I came into your life with such selfish intentions," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Elizabeth leaned her head on his shoulder. "I saw a good man who had lost his way, and I knew that with love and trust, you would find your true path." As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, Jason felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. He thought about the lessons he had learned, about honesty, integrity, and the true meaning of wealth. He realized that the richest moments in his life weren't tied to money, but to the love he shared with Elizabeth and the difference they made together. "You gave me a second chance," Jason said, turning to face Elizabeth fully. "And I promise you, I'm going to make the most of it. Every single day." Elizabeth cupped his face in her hands, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We'll make the most of it together, my love." As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jason and Elizabeth stood in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. They both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, their love and shared purpose would guide them through. Would you forgive someone like Jason if they admitted their lies? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going.